My name is Daniel Mercer, and the morning my life got wiped, it was a Tuesday that smelled like coffee and drywall dust. I'd just come in from the garage, set my phone on the counter, and turned to rinse the grit off my hands. When I picked it back up, the lock screen was gone. The wallpaper was gone. Everything was gone. Hello, it chirped, like a brand new device. Press home to open. I pressed. Language, English. Region, United States. Connect to Wi-Fi. Choose a network. I reset a lot of things for a living: routers, expectations, the occasional stubborn procurement officer who believes duct tape is a solution. I'm calm when other people panic. But staring at that hello, I felt something primal grab the base of my skull and squeeze. Quick pit stop. If you're into true slow-burn family revenge told straight from the living room, hit subscribe and tap the bell, then drop a comment of your area name. I drop one of these every week, and this one? It starts with a blank phone and ends in court with receipts. All right. Back in. I'm 40, project manager for a commercial build outfit in Denver. 2 kids, a workshop that smells like cedar and optimism, a marriage that, up until last year, felt solid even when we were both too tired to talk. My wife, Erin, is an ICU nurse who can tie a suture with one hand and cook a mean chili with the other. Erin's younger sister, Alyssa, moved in with us for a couple months after a breakup and stayed long enough to know where we keep the good towels. The case, because there's always a case in a story like this, started 9 months before the phone wiped itself. My dad died, and with him went 25 years of handshake deals and knuckle-busted hardware stores. He and his partner, Ricky Vaughn, ran Mile High Supply out of an old brick building off Brighton Boulevard. Dad kept paper books like it 1987. Ricky kept the keys to the bank deposit bag like it was 2005, and no one had ever heard of ACH. When we were cleaning out the office, I found 2 sets of ledgers. One honest, the kind my father would be proud of. One full of numbers that didn't add up unless you were siphoning 5% of every major order into a shell company called Cobalt Inc., LLC. I had screenshots, photos, emails where Ricky forgot he was CCing my dad and wrote things like, "Move this one to Cobalt." I had voice memos, because if you didn't record the goodbye tour of your father's business from a man like Ricky, you were going to miss the lies. We didn't go straight to the police. My father raised me to ask once in private before you ask in public. I asked. Ricky smiled the way men smile when their souls are out of town. I lawyered up. Lydia Cross, if you're in Denver and your problem smells like fraud, you know her name, took my file, read it once, and told me 2 things: this is solid, and don't you dare get cute. Chain of custody or don't bother. So I got careful. I kept copies of everything on my phone because I lived on job sites and courthouses and kids' soccer sidelines. I also kept them on a little SSD in my gun safe and on a cloud drive with a boring name. I used a password manager like a grown-up. I scheduled a hearing for a prejudgment writ to freeze assets tied to Cobalt. The Friday before that Tuesday, I stood in Lydia's office, signed an affidavit, and tapped my pocket where my phone buzzed with a text from Erin: "Dinner at 6. Love you." On Tuesday, my phone said hello. I tried to restore from backup. The last iCloud backup? 2 months old, for a different device. The local backups? Missing from my MacBook, which made my scalp tingle. My password manager? It wanted the master password I'd stored in a secure note on, wait for it, my phone. 2-factor authentication? The texts went to a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped like an elevator cut loose. Then came the email. Subject: your Apple ID was used to erase an iPhone. If this was you, you can ignore this email. If this wasn't you, change your password immediately. The timestamp: 9:12 a.m. The IP address, masked but geolocated to Denver. The device used, Safari on Mac OS. I don't have a Mac desktop. Erin doesn't either. Alyssa does, a rose gold MacBook Air with a sticker that says "Good vibes only like a dare." I turned around and found her at the breakfast bar, nursing an iced latte the size of her head. "Alyssa," I said, carefully casual, "you didn't happen to use my Apple account this morning, did you?" She blinked, big eyes, bigger lashes. "Why would I?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe to play Apple Arcade on your laptop? Or, I don't know." I held up my phone. Somebody erased my phone. She put a hand to her chest like I'd announced a death in the family. "Oh my God. Danny, that's awful. Do you think it's those Russian hackers?" My friend Adrienne's aunt's Facebook got hacked last month and they posted like weird hair loss ads. I stared at her mouth forming the word hackers like it had 3 syllables.
Alyssa is bright.
She is also the kind of person who deletes emails based on the subject line because she cannot be bothered to scroll. If she'd erased my phone, she was either better at lying than I gave her credit for, or she thought I was worse at seeing through it than I am. I texted Erin at work. My phone got wiped. Everything gone.
Backups sketchy.
You touch my MacBook lately? She replied 10 minutes later, oh no.
No, haven't touched your stuff.
Are kids okay? Do you need me to take an early lunch? I stood there listening to the hummingbird of panic flap around in my chest.
The kids were at school.
The house was quiet except for the dishwasher and my brain trying to rip time in half so I could go back 30 minutes and unpress the invisible button someone had pressed. I went into the office and checked my MacBook. The local backups were missing, yes. The trash was recently empty. The recent items menu, which most people forget about, told a different story. A file called backup_merc_iPhone had been opened yesterday at 11:08 p.m. by guest.
I don't have a guest account. I did yesterday.
The router log showed a new device on the network last night, identified as MacBook Air Alyssa. I checked my password manager on my laptop. It still had me logged in, but the emergency kit with a master password, my belt and suspenders fallback, was located in a secure note labeled Master, Do Not Delete. It had been deleted. The audit log showed the deletion at 11:12 p.m. last night, from Safari on macOS.
I closed my eyes.
It doesn't take a genius to know the shape of a hand when it slaps you. I didn't storm out into the kitchen and drop the hammer.
I called Lydia. Tell me the worst, I said.
The worst is you've lost the easy path, she said. The better news is we have the hard path, which still works if we don't screw it up. And if this was done intentionally by someone under your roof, we're in obstruction territory, which judges enjoy about as much as getting audited. What do I do? First, she said, stop talking to the people you suspect.
Do not go cowboy.
Second, list everything you know, the logs, the times, the devices.
Third, come in.
We're going to file an emergency motion for a preservation order and spoliation sanctions. Fourth, tell me you still have the SSD.
I do, I said.
My fingers found it in the safe, a little metal tile the size of a graham cracker. I plugged it in and my heart kicked when it mounted. The last sync was Sunday night, 10:03 p.m. inside, a folder called Dad, MHS Evidence. The video files were there, Ricky in the office, leaning back telling my father, we always settled it on Fridays, Jack you know that, and then tapping a ledger where a different number appeared in pencil over ink. The screenshots were there, bank statements, emails, scanned invoices that went out under Mile High's letterhead and came back paid to Cobalt Inc., LLC. The voice memos were there.
The texts, some of them. Enough to be a lifeline.
Not everything I had on my phone, but enough. I sat down like I'd run a mile and put my head in my hands. I must have made a sound because Duke, our neighbor's golden retriever who thinks our house is his house, pressed his nose under my elbow and huffed. At Lydia's, I handed over the SSD like it was a newborn. This is why we make copies, she said gently. She added the router logs, the Apple email, the password manager audit log to my file. We drafted a motion with words like spoliation, litigation hold, and adverse inference. We asked the court to compel Ricky to preserve all records across any devices and to restrain anyone connected to him from altering, deleting, or accessing any of my accounts, because I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. What about Alyssa? I asked, because her name tasted like copper in my mouth.
We don't name her, Lydia said. Not yet. But we preserve. And Daniel?
Change your locks. Change your Wi-Fi. Change your Apple ID. Change your password manager master. Put the new master on paper, in a safe, not on any device. We'll deal with family when we have proof. Proof. Such a clean word for something that feels like crawling through insulation with your eyes open. I went home and did the unglamorous work. New router admin creds. New SSID. New Apple ID password from a vocab I had to reprint from muscle memory. I removed every trusted device I didn't recognize. I removed a trusted phone number I did. I'll let you guess whose. I set up physical two-factor for my email and my password manager. I added a new user to the router named Honeypot, because I have a sense of humor even when I shouldn't. At dinner, I watched Aaron stir chili and watched Alyssa scroll Instagram and felt like I was sitting at a table with someone who'd robbed me while I slept. The kids burned their tongues and laughed and asked if we could watch that show where people build tiny houses in trees.
We did.
I pretended I wasn't counting the breaths between Aaron's laughter and Alyssa's. That's so cute, I could do that, and the way my son Max watched his aunt like she hung the moon. The next morning, my inbox pinged. Your Apple ID was used to sign in on a MacBook Air.
Location, Denver.
Browser, Safari. I had changed my password last night. Whoever tried just now got an SMS code prompt. It went to my number, not the other one.
Progress.
Then came the text from a number I didn't recognize. Hey, for the case, still need those files?
Ricky's team. I didn't respond.
I screenshotted, forwarded to Lydia. She called within a minute. Don't engage. This is either a test or a leash. Either way, we stay out of reach. I think it's Alyssa, I said, finally saying the name out loud. I think you think it's Alyssa, she said, steady. Let's prove it. Here's how we did it without turning me into a felon, and if you hear me giving legal advice in this story, you're hearing wrong. I'm telling you what I did, not what you should do. We created 3 canary files, identical in content but unique at the microscopic level. Canary tokens are like dye you pour into a river to see where it leaks. You put a tiny, unique marker in a document or a URL, and when someone opens it, it pings a server and tells you an IP address and a timestamp. Lydia's investigator, a woman named Margot who could tail you through a parade and not lose you, set them up. Each file had a different URL and a different invisible pixel. Each one was watermarked with a unique phrase, so we could trace a printout to its source if it came to that. We told 3 people, 3 different lies. To Aaron, who I didn't suspect and hated lying to, I said we'd recovered a draft motion with attachments and shared it to a Google Drive link in case she wanted to see what Lydia was filing. Aaron said she trusted me and didn't need to read legalese and went to bed with a forehead kiss. The canary we gave her sat untouched. To my son, 13, curious, occasionally chaotic, I told him there was a cool drone photo from our last camping trip in my recoveries folder with a link. He opened it on his school Chromebook and texted me a series of emojis I don't speak. That canary pinged a Jefferson County Schools IP at 4:03 p.m. and then nothing else. To Alyssa I said this, I think I got most of the case files back. Can you eyeball and tell me if you see anything obvious missing? I know you're good with tech. Here's the link. She replied in under a minute.
Of course.
So glad you got them. This whole thing has had me stressed for you, Danny. At 12:17 a.m., the canary we'd sent to Alyssa pinged from an IP block registered to Chandler and Slate, LLP, a boutique firm downtown. At 12:49, it pinged again from a T-Mobile mobile network. At 1:06, it pinged from a coffee shop on Broadway that closes at midnight but has a patio and free Wi-Fi if you sit close enough to the door. At 1:47, it pinged from a Comcast residential line 2 blocks from the apartment of Alyssa's not-so-ex-boyfriend, a guy named Chase who sold insurance on paper and consulting in practice. Margot was sitting in her car on the block with a camera and an espresso. She watched Alyssa walk out of Chase's building at 1:50 in a hoodie and leggings with a man's jacket around her shoulders, carrying a laptop. She watched her stop under a streetlight, turn the laptop so the glow washed her face, and type. Got her, Margot said to Lydia at 2 a.m., and got him.
I didn't sleep.
I pretended to. I lay next to my wife and listened to the house settle and named the noises like a storm tracker. When the sun came up, I made pancakes for the kids because making eggs feels like hope. Alyssa rolled in at 9:30 looking like a person who took a nap in her car at dawn. She took a pancake off a plate and said, "You're a saint for cooking." I said nothing and folded a dish towel like I was trying to strangle it. Lydia's office hummed that day. We filed the motion for spoliation sanctions. We filed a petition for a temporary restraining order preventing Ricky and any agents known or unknown from accessing, altering, deleting, or interfering with any of my accounts or devices. We attached exhibits, router logs, screenshot of the Apple email, the password manager audit, the canary token alert logs, Margot's affidavit with photos taken under a streetlight that made Alyssa's laptop look like a bad idea.
Now what? I asked.
Now we see who runs, Lydia said.
And Daniel?
I'm going to ask you a hard thing.
Do not confront Alyssa. Yet.
What do I do with all of it? I asked, because the anger felt like a live wire in my teeth.
You make dinner, she said. You go to work. You be boring.
Will be exciting for you.
Ricky blinked first.
He showed up at the courthouse with a lawyer so tan he looked like a leather belt and filed a motion to dismiss, calling my suit a family dispute dressed as fraud. Judge Pence, who ran her courtroom like a teacher runs a class of 7th graders who smell like Axe and hormones, called an emergency hearing for Friday. She granted our TROX part, which means we got it without Ricky there, because the risk of evidence disappearing was high and obvious. That night, I came home to Erin and a bottle of grocery store wine open on the counter. "You're quiet," she said, by which she meant quieter than my usual quiet. "My phone wasn't an accident," I said. Her eyes widened and her hand went to her throat. "Who?" "I can't tell you yet without putting you in a bad spot," I said, and watched that land. Erin is not a woman who loves being kept in the dark. She is also a professional, and she understood the shape of liability. "Is it someone in this house?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Likely." She closed her eyes. "Daniel." "I know," I said. "I know." Friday, we filed into Judge Pence's court with our stacks of paper and our conservative suits. Ricky sat on the other side, his jaw clenched and hair sprayed like a country singer. His lawyer tried to sell a story about sad sons and misunderstandings. Lydia stood and was gentle where she could be, sharp where she had to be. She walked the judge through Dad's ledgers and the cobalt siphon. Then she walked her through the wipe. "We are not here today to litigate family drama," she said, even though that's exactly where we were. "We are here because my client's phone was intentionally erased 3 days before a preservation hearing, his local backups were deleted, his password manager compromised, and a canary file he shared to one person in his household was opened repeatedly from IP addresses linked to the opposing party's agent." Ricky's lawyer leaned on the lectern like it was a friend. "Your Honor, even if a wipe occurred, and we're not conceding that, there's zero evidence tying my client to any behavior in Mr. Mercer's home. This is paranoia wrapped in jargon." "Jargon is just accuracy you didn't learn," Judge Pence said, which made me want to embroider something for her chambers. She granted the preservation order. She granted our motion to forensically image any devices that had logged into my accounts in the last 30 days. She set a date for a contempt hearing if agents known or unknown failed to comply. We got home to a house that felt like a museum. Alyssa wasn't there. A quick scroll told me she'd posted a boomerang from a rooftop bar with a caption that said "manifesting," and a song that made me feel older than I am. At 9 p.m., my doorbell rang. It was Morales, different from the Morales in another story you might have heard, but every city has a Morales. Detective Jason Morales, white-collar division, hairline of a man who has seen too much and still believes he can fix some of it. He stood on my porch, hat in his hands like we were in a different century. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Sorry to knock late. You got a minute?" He came in, drank my bad coffee, and asked me questions that looked like small talk and weren't. He had our filings. He had the canary logs. He had a printout of a text chain from Alyssa's phone because Margot is not the only person who can pull strings in this city. "You know we're a one-party consent state," he said, not as instructions, but as context, which means if someone recorded that laptop party under the streetlight, it's not my problem. "I didn't record that," I said. "My investigator did." He smiled into his cup. "Even better." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we let people who think they're smarter than you prove they're not," he said. "And, Mr. Mercer?" "Stay out of the way." The next morning, Erin and Alyssa were on the back patio. Erin's voice was hushed and fierce. Alyssa's was pitched higher than usual, the way it gets when she's performing innocence. I stood at the sink and watched their mouths in profile without hearing a word because glass is glass. Erin came inside 10 minutes later, wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and said, "You should have told me." "I was trying to spare you a choice," I said, which is a coward's way of saying I didn't want to make her pick a side out loud. "That's not how marriage works," she said, and it sliced me cleaner than any judge could. Around noon, Alyssa texted me, "Hey, I heard about the court thing. Did I do something? If so, I'm like really sorry, I was just trying to help." If you've ever had someone set your house on fire and then ask why you hate matches, you know that feeling. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Lydia, who forwarded it to Morales, who added it to a file. We weren't done. If the wipe was the match, the gasoline was the network behind it. Ricky didn't swing a MacBook. He swung people. We needed his people to touch their faces at the same time so the camera could catch them. We planned a meeting. We let it slip, through a mutual friend, through a cousin who talks too much, that I had recovered everything, and was willing to talk settlement if Ricky made it worth it. We leaned on a human trait I don't love in myself or others. Greed wants to be fast.
They bit.
A man named Spencer called me from a blocked number and offered to walk me through a path where everybody comes out whole.
We set a time.
We picked the conference room at Lydia's because I like home court advantage and because her building has cameras I trust.
I brought a binder.
It was full of paper that looked like evidence to someone who doesn't know what evidence looks like. Screenshots with black bars redacted, printouts of emails with headers slightly off, ledger pages that were real but marked copy.
It was bait.
Into the spine of the binder, Margot slid a tracker smaller than a fingernail. Into one page of the binder, we sprayed an invisible UV pattern that reads like a barcode under the right light, so if they scanned it, we could tie the scan to the page. If they printed it, the pattern would show. Canary tokens curl into a lot of shapes if you feed them right. Spencer walked in with Chase, the not boyfriend, and a third man with the cologne of a 19-year-old and the watch of a 45-year-old who needs strangers to know he has money. Alyssa was not with them. She was in my house with my wife, crying, which I didn't learn until later and which made my stomach go cold when I did. "Daniel," Spencer said, offering a hand I didn't take. "This is unnecessary. You and Ricky go back. No reason to get the state involved." "You called me," I said, voice low.
He smiled.
"You know how it is. Men in suits do what men in suits do." "I build things," I said. "I prefer boots." Chase smirked and sat, stretching his arms across the back of a chair like a high school linebacker at homecoming. "Look," he said, "you're making a big deal out of a small discrepancy." 5% over 5 years is not small, I said.
"It's a lake."
"You got proof?" he asked, knowing or hoping I didn't. I set the binder on the table and slid it across.
"Enough," I said.
"Enough for a judge to freeze accounts and bring in forensics. Enough for a DA to consider words like scheme with a straight face."
They flipped. They whispered.
Spencer made a phone call in the hallway and came back with an offer. "We can get you out whole.
You drop the complaint.
You sign a NDA." He wrote a number on a legal pad like we were at a yard sale.
"I don't want your money," I said.
"I want what my father built to stop being used like an ATM." Spencer's face honeyed, which is the only word I have for it. "You don't have to posture," he said. "We can send something to your wife. You don't even have to touch it. We can take care of Alyssa's situation too. She's in a bind she didn't create. Family sticks, you know." "Ask Chase about family," I said, and watched his eyes flicker, just once. Margot, behind the glass, texted Lydia one word, "Bingo." The offer on the pad became 2 offers.
Money now, money later.
I took photos with my eyes and said no with my mouth. When they left with the binder, they thought they won a round. They carried a tracker out of our building like a trophy. We watched the dot go from downtown to the parking garage at Chandler and Slate, to a co-working space on Blake Street with a neon sign that says hustle, to a loft that used to be a warehouse and now houses entitled furniture, to, and here's where the hair on my arm stood, to my street. The dot paused 2 houses down. Then it moved to my driveway. Then it sat very still for a long 5 minutes. I stood behind the curtain and watched Spencer stand under my eave holding my binder, wearing a baseball cap like a toddler's disguise, look at my doorbell camera, and then walk away. He put the binder on my porch table. There was a sticky note stuck to the cover. It said, "Think about your family." That night, the binder lived in a plastic tote with an evidence seal in Lydia's office. Under UV, the pages glowed a grid that told us exactly which pages had been scanned and where. The canary phones pinged us whenever a page opened on a device we didn't control. Morales got what he needed to draft a warrant for Spencer's laptop. The DA got enough to add attempted tampering to the list. What about Alyssa? You're waiting for the part where I light her up. I wanted to. I wanted to walk into the kitchen and lay the timeline on the table like a deck of cards and make her pick them up and read them out loud. I wanted to say, "You did this to me," to Aaron, to the kids.
For who? For Chase?
For what, brunch and a view?
I didn't.
Lydia didn't let me. Aaron asked me to wait. And then Alyssa confessed on her own, which is both worse and better and still sits in my chest like a rock.
It was a Sunday night.
The kids were at my sister's. The Broncos were losing by points that made no sense. Aaron stood in the doorway to the den, eyes red, and said, "Alyssa has something to say." Alyssa stood behind her, small and prickly in a hoodie, and couldn't look at me. I did it, she said to the carpet. I erased your phone. Erin put a hand on her shoulder.
Alyssa.
I erased it, she said louder, like volume could make the thing cleaner. Chase said it would just reset and you'd be able to restore everything, that it would buy us time, that it was just buying time, and then I could help you get it all back. He said you were overreacting and, like, ruining your own life with stress.
He said he knew people. He says a lot, I said.
Her chin came up, and for the first time, I saw the person she decided to be. You think you're the only one who knows how tech works? She snapped. You keep everything on that phone. You're always typing and screenshotting and lecturing about backups like that's a personality. Chase said if we cleared it and deleted your stupid notes, it would force you to take a breath. He said nobody was going to let you blow up an entire company over some ledgers your dad probably fudged every January because that's how old guys do taxes. Your boyfriend committed a felony, I said. You helped him commit another. Her face folded in on itself and came out sneering. Oh my God, Danny, you're so dramatic. Erin exhaled like she'd been holding it for a decade.
Alyssa, stop.
It was my phone, I said, quiet, because quiet carries. It was my father's name.
It was your sister's life. You didn't just touch a device. You touched my house.
Don't ever tell me to breathe again. She made a sound that wasn't words and stomped down the hall like a teenager, which is funny only because she's 28. I slept badly. The next morning, Alyssa was gone. Erin's note on the counter said she'd driven her to her friends. There was a second note from Alyssa. I'm sorry you feel this way.
No period.
I stared at the U until my vision went weird.
Lydia called at 10. Ricky's flipping, she said.
Not because he's a good person, because he's a coward. He wants a meeting with the DA. He's going to point his finger at everyone between him and the mirror. Does he point at Chase?
I asked. He will, she said.
He's already humming the tune. Morales called at noon. We got warrants for Spencer and for a laptop at Chandler and Slate. We'll pick them up today. Keep your doors locked. Not because I expect trouble. Because I like boring. By Friday, Chandler and Slate had fired Spencer. By Monday, the DA had filed charges: theft, fraud, conspiracy, attempted tampering with evidence. Chase made the kind of short walk men make when they think they can talk their way out of a hole. He learned the hard way that words never stack higher than paper. Alyssa got a summons, not handcuffs. She was charged with obstruction and unauthorized access. Felonies, yes, but the kind that come with first-time deals if your lawyer can draw breath and read the room.
Erin stopped sleeping.
We talked like diplomats. We passed in the kitchen like ships who used to share a berth and now pretend the ocean is big enough for both.
She loved her sister. She loved me.
If you think that's a choice you can make with your frontal cortex, you've never tried it. The civil case against Ricky moved like a big machine where the gears are greased with appointments and coffee. We got our writ. We froze accounts tied to Cobalt. We got a forensic accounting report that made me want to call my dad's old accountant and ask him why his blood wasn't on the ledger too. We settled before trial because the weight of his own paperwork pushed Ricky's face down onto the table.
He signed.
He wrote a check with shaking hands. I signed too, feeling something like relief and something like grief and something like the ghost of my father behind my left shoulder saying, "Son, you did good.
Now go home."
We still had the family part left. Lydia arranged a meeting with Alyssa's public defender, because even when they hurt you, they're still your people, and we worked out a deal. Alyssa would testify, on paper and in person, about Chase's role in the wipe and the pipeline of solutions he ran between Ricky's group and the kind of lawyers who use phrases like "just make it go away." She would pay restitution to me for the mess she caused, not the amount of the case, not the value of the years, just the cost of the cleanup and the hours lost. She would agree to a no-contact order with Ricky, with Chase, with Spencer, with anyone tied to Cobalt.
She would leave our house.
She agreed, eyes big, hands shaking, voice small.
I didn't hug her. Erin did.
I watched from a corner that used to be my favorite place in our living room and felt nothing that fit in a sentence. A month later, in Judge Pence's courtroom, Alyssa stood up in a suit jacket that didn't fit and pled to a lesser count: attempted tampering with evidence, Class 1 misdemeanor, 12 months deferred judgment, community service, a fine that made her swallow hard, restitution to me, a letter to the court. Chase pled to tampering and conspiracy and got probation plus a record that would keep him out of insurance and consulting in any city that runs a background check like it's not optional. Spencer pled to attempted tampering. Ricky pled to theft and fraud. A parade of names pled to mirrors.
In the meantime, I rebuilt. I rebuilt accounts.
I rebuilt trust with the part of my brain that thought, it's fine, it's family, what's the worst that can happen? I rebuilt my marriage from the weird middle out. I told Erin the truth even when it made her cry. She told me the truth even when it made me throw a wrench across the garage and scare myself. We took a break from being siblings-in-law to work on being husband and wife.
It was ugly. Then it was better.
Then it was ours again. One Saturday in September, I sat at the kitchen table with my daughter, Ellie, and helped her build a diorama of a cell out of Jell-O and paper clips. Max rode his bike in the driveway and pretended the cul-de-sac was the Indianapolis 500.
Erin made coffee.
The house was boring. I have never been more grateful for boredom.
Alyssa moved to Fort Collins.
She got a job at a little marketing firm that specializes in making yoga studios look like they were founded by mystics. She sent Erin a postcard that said, simply, "I'm trying," which is the most sincere thing she's ever written.
We don't follow each other on social anymore. It's good.
The last piece of revenge, if you can call it that, and I do gently, was a letter I got from the Colorado Attorney General's office with a case number and a sentence that said, "We would not have been able to prosecute this scheme without the materials you preserved." I pinned it on a corkboard in my workshop next to the plans for a bookcase I still haven't built. Some days I look at it and think, that's what revenge looks like at 40. A letter on a wall and a wife who comes home and a son who learns to set a password manager up the right way and a daughter who will never, ever plug her phone into a cable she didn't bring. If you want a movie ending, I'm not your guy. I don't do rain-slicked streets and shouted confessions.
I do checklists. I do math.
I do get quiet and get precise and wait for loud people to ruin themselves.
What did I learn?
Backups are not a personality, but they're close.
Family is not armor.
It's just proximity. If someone lives under your roof, you're letting them into your accounts whether you hand them a password or not. Act accordingly. You don't have to be loud to be effective. You have to be thorough. I keep an index card taped inside the safe now. It says 1. If something gets wiped, breathe.
2. Don't confront. Document. 3. Call Lydia. 4. Call Margot. 5. Lock it down. Change creds. Remove devices.
6. Set bait with clear markers. 7. Let their greed do the running.
8. Eat. Sleep.
You are not helpful when you're feral. A friend asked me the other day, "Do you forgive her?"
He meant Alyssa.
I stared at the table for a while and then said, "I don't know if forgiveness is a switch or a dimmer."
Mine's on a dimmer.
It's brighter than it was. He nodded like I'd passed a test I didn't study for. One last thing before we cut the lights. If stories like this help you carry your own mess, hit subscribe. I'm not selling revenge fantasies. I'm handing you a map, coffee-stained and folded wrong, that gets you from hello on a wiped phone to a judge saying, "Motion granted." Next week, I'll tell you about the time my neighbor tried to sell my driveway on Facebook Marketplace. Spoiler, he met my HOA.